The night my daughter-in-law called me a problem. She was sitting at my dinner table, in the house I had built for my dead wife, using a tone she might have used to fire an employee who had stayed past his contract. She did not shout. Serena never shouted where anyone could hear her. She just looked at me across the pot roast I had made, with my grandson beside me in his booster seat, and let the words settle into the room like a verdict she had already decided before she arrived. My son Derek did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He did not look at me at all. He lowered his eyes to his plate and let the silence confirm what she had said. That was the moment I understood I had not simply lost respect in my own family. I had been reclassified. I was no longer a father, a grandfather, a man who had built his life with his bare hands and his wife's laughter. I was an account with a heartbeat, a signature that had outlived its usefulness. I am Walter Graves. I am 64 years old. I spent most of my life believing that a man protects his family by working hard, staying useful, and keeping his pain to himself. I was a civil engineer for 30 years. I understood load-bearing structures, pressure points, and the exact moment a design begins to fail. What I did not understand, not until it was almost too late, was that a family could be engineered against you. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Because what happened at that dinner table did not begin that night. It began years earlier. Quietly. The way all structural damage begins. Not with a catastrophe. With a hairline crack. My wife Carol died in the spring of 2013. I will not try to describe what that was like in a way that makes it sound manageable. Because it was not manageable. We had been together for 31 years. I had built our house with her input on every room. When she said the bedroom needed more morning light, I redrew the wall. When she wanted the kitchen window facing the garden, I moved the whole layout. The house became the shape of our marriage before a single board was ever lifted. We moved in on a Tuesday in March of 1996. Derek was 11, running from room to room like the place had been built just for him. In some ways, it had. After Carol died, I did not leave. People assumed I stayed because the house had value. They were wrong. I stayed because her handwriting was still inside the pantry door, where she had written grocery lists and small notes to herself over the years. Her lavender was still in a bowl by the kitchen window. Some mornings, when the light came through the glass at a certain angle, I could almost convince myself she had only stepped into the next room. The grief never entirely left. It just learned to live alongside me. Derek started coming around more often after his mother was gone. He would drive up from Charlotte on Sunday afternoons, usually without calling first. And I never minded because silence from your child is still better than an empty driveway. We would sit on the back porch while the evening came down over the yard. Two men pretending to enjoy the weather when really we were both sitting inside the same loss. He had his mother's instincts back then. If my coffee went cold, he would refill it without asking. If I stared too long at Carol's empty chair, he would start talking about something ordinary just to pull me back into the room. I should have told him more often what that meant to me. But fathers are foolish sometimes. We assume there will always be another Sunday. Then Serena came into his life. And slowly, the Sundays became less frequent. And when they came, they had a different shape. Oliver was born 2 years after they married. And I will not pretend the details of my feelings were complicated. He was placed in my arms in that hospital room. And when I looked down at his hands, wide-palmed and long-fingered, I recognized Carol immediately. Something that had been very still inside my chest since the funeral began to move again. Serena was watching me from the bed with that calm, measuring expression she kept for situations she had not yet fully assessed. I held my grandson quietly and did not say anything about his grandmother's hands. I understood, even then. On some level, I was not ready to name that Serena was a woman who cataloged everything. The first time she asked me for money, I nearly admired the craftsmanship. Oliver was 4 months old. They had invited me for dinner. And halfway through the meal, Serena began describing a house they had found in Myers Park. Beautiful neighborhood, she said. Safe streets. Excellent schools. Excellent schools. Excellent schools. Excellent schools. Excellent schools. A backyard where Oliver could grow up properly. She painted the picture so carefully, it took me a full minute to realize she was not sharing a dream. She was opening a negotiation. Derek sat beside her, nodding gently, like a man watching a performance he had already rehearsed. The down payment was a little heavy, she said. Just temporary help. A loan between family. Luan. That was the last time she ever used that word. I gave them $80,000. I told myself it was for Oliver. I told myself a good grandfather invests in stability. I told myself that Derek would have asked himself if the need were truly real. But somewhere beneath those explanations, I think part of me had already heard the door open. I just chose to believe it was hospitality. After the first check, the requests did not stop. They simply became smaller, smarter, and harder to question. A few thousand for repairs at the Myers Park house. A contribution towards Serena's car, which was suddenly unreliable. Preschool fees for Oliver, because the right environment at that age could shape his entire future. Every request arrived wrapped in logic and delivered with Serena's pleasant voice at the dinner table. Every need was temporary, urgent, and connected somehow to my grandson. That was the mechanism. Of course, if the request was about Serena, I might hesitate. If it was about Derek, I might ask questions. But Oliver was the key she had found to a door I would never fully close. I did not see it clearly then. I thought I was helping my family. I thought every check was keeping me woven into their lives. What I was actually doing was being trained, conditioned, like a man who keeps feeding a gate and then wonders why he cannot pass through it. Serena never slammed doors. She controlled the room in quieter ways. If I began telling Derek a story from his childhood, she would smoothly redirect with something about Oliver's schedule. If I asked my son a direct question, she answered it before he could open his mouth. When I arrived wearing my old work clothes, she would glance at me for half a second. Just long enough. She called their house our home, in a tone that made it clear I was not inside the word our. My access to Oliver was managed, never cut off entirely, because that would have been too visible, but managed. Visits had to be scheduled. Time alone with my grandson was rare. Affection was permitted only inside the boundaries she set. And whenever money changed hands, the access would briefly loosen, then tighten again once the payment cleared. I understand the architecture now. She did not need to remove me all at once. She only needed to make me grateful for whatever piece of family she still allowed me. I started noticing the change in Derek around Oliver's first birthday. At first, the changes were small enough to explain away. One canceled Sunday, then another. When I called, he answered, but his voice had less room in it. Our conversations grew shorter and more formal, like a man checking in with an obligation rather than his father. I told myself he was tired, new baby, demanding job, expensive house. A man can build a shelter out of excuses when the truth is standing right in front of him. But Derek was not simply tired. He was changing. The warmth Carol had loved in him, that quiet instinct to notice when someone nearby was hurting, was disappearing behind something harder and more calculated. When Serena spoke, he followed. When she redirected, he allowed it. When I was edged toward the margins of their life, he did not reach across to stop it. He just looked away, one small silence at a time. In the spring of 2021, I sold my engineering firm. Grave Civil had started with 2 employees in a rented office above a dry cleaner in Greensboro. 22 years later, it had 41 people, contracts across 6 states, and my name on projects. I still drove past occasionally just to remind myself that some things I had built still stood. The sale price was $4,300,000. After taxes, legal fees, and the accounts Carol and I had planned together before she got sick. I was comfortable, not extravagant, comfortable, enough to live quietly, maintain the house, choose when and how to help, and leave something meaningful for Oliver one day. When I told Derek, he sounded pleased in the polite way people react to good news that does not directly affect them. Serena called the next morning. Her voice was warmer than usual, almost too warm, like a window opened just slightly more than it needed to be. She congratulated me, asked careful questions, then mentioned estate planning. Family should be protected. She said, 3 weeks later, Derek asked if I would add him to my primary brokerage account, just for visibility. He said, for planning purposes. Serena felt it made sense given the assets that would eventually come to them. I heard the phrase, I noted it, but I added him to the account. Because a father wants to believe trust is safer than suspicion. What I did not know then was that I had just handed Serena the second key to a door I had not yet realized I was building. I might have kept telling myself comfortable stories indefinitely if Frank Calloway had not stopped me on the 7th hole one Thursday morning. Frank was my attorney. More than that, he was the kind of friend who could tell when a man was bleeding, even when the man had not said he was hurt. He watched me quietly for months before he finally asked the question. Walter, how much have you given them this year? I said I was not sure. He looked at me. Yes. You are. That night, I went home and spread my bank statements across the kitchen table. Numbers have a way of telling the truth when people refuse to. Over 18 months, I had transferred or gifted $237,000 to Derek and Serena. Then I counted something else. How many times had I been alone with Oliver? Truly alone, without Serena present or nearby. Twice. The structure became visible all at once. The way damage always reveals itself too late. I sat at that kitchen table long after midnight, looking at those statements as though they belonged to a stranger. That shame arrived before the anger. A quiet, heavy shame. Because I had participated in building the trap I was standing inside. Every transfer had felt reasonable at the time. Every request had arrived with a story. Every payment had made me feel, for a few hours, like I still mattered to my son. I had been buying access to my own family. I am not a man who cries easily. Carol used to joke that my tear ducts were made of reinforced concrete. But that night, in the house I built for her, with her handwriting still inside the pantry door, I broke. I cried because I missed my wife. I cried because I had watched my son drift away and told myself it was weather. And I cried because I finally understood what I had allowed to happen while I was busy being useful. Then I wiped my face and called Frank. But I want to be honest with you about something. Even after everything I had seen in those numbers, even after Frank had said what we both already knew, part of me still refused to be done with Derek. That is the foolish mercy of a father's heart. It keeps searching for the boy inside the man, even after the man has made his choices clearly. So I gave Derek 3 more months. Not because the evidence suggested hope. It did not. I gave him time because I needed to know, before I changed everything, whether my son was truly gone or only lost. Christmas was the test. I prepared the house the way Carol would have wanted. I brought down the ornament boxes from the attic, the ones she had labeled in her careful handwriting. The little lighthouse from Maine, the painted bell from Charleston, the wooden angel Derek had made in 2nd grade, with one wing glued on slightly crooked because he had been in a hurry and did not want to wait for it to dry. I put that one on the tree too. I wanted Derek to walk into that house and remember, before Serena, before the mortgage and the management and the careful calculations, before everything became a transaction, I wanted him to see his mother's ornaments and feel the shape of who we had been. But Serena did not walk through that house like a family member. She walked through it like an appraiser. She opened cabinets. She commented on the age of the appliances. She looked at the floors and the countertops and mentioned that updating the place would help it hold its value better. Derek stood nearby. mostly on his phone. Only Oliver moved through that house with any wonder. He found Carol's lavender bowl on the kitchen windowsill, picked it up, held it toward me, and asked what it smelled like. For one moment, when he smiled, I saw Carol in his face so clearly I had to look away. On New Year's Eve, Serena stopped pretending. I had made Carol's pot roast. The real recipe. The one from the card box in the drawer. With the note in Carol's handwriting at the bottom that said more garlic. Always more garlic. We were halfway through dinner when Serena started talking about the Myers Park house again. This time it was a sunroom. An addition off the back. Good for resale, she said. Good for family gatherings. Good for Oliver. Then she said the number, $280,000. The table went still in a specific way. The way air goes still before something shifts. Serena looked at me with that polished, patient expression she wore when she had already decided how the conversation should end. She said it would be a smart investment, not a cost. She said I would be putting money into equity, into Oliver's future. I set my fork down. That is a large number. I said, not anger. Not yet. Simply the truth spoken plainly. Her smile changed slightly. It is an investment. There is a difference. I know the difference. I said, I built a business on the difference. And that was when the mask slipped. Not fully. Not dramatically. Just long enough for me to see what was underneath. Not embarrassment. Not surprise. Irritation. The irritation of a person who has prepared a script and found that the other party has refused to follow it. She leaned back and said, Walter, we have been patient. We have been flexible. But support needs to be reliable. Not conditional. Reliable. That one word told me everything I had refused to hear for years. She was not speaking to a father. She was speaking to a line item that had become inconvenient. In her mind, my money had already been absorbed into the life they were building. My hesitation was not caution. It was disobedience. I turned to Derek then. Because even now, even after everything, some stubborn part of me believed my son would stop it. He had heard every word. He had heard his wife speak to his father across his father's own table, in the house his father had built, as though my love were a recurring payment that had missed a month. All he had to do was look at me. Instead, he put his fork down slowly. He raised his eyes, and he said, Dad, she is right. He said I had the resources. He said they were not asking for anything I could not spare. And then, as though he had saved the sharpest thing for last, he said, This is my family. As if I was not. I did not argue. There was nothing left to argue. Oliver was sitting beside me, working through his pot roast with the focused seriousness of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned that the adults around him were breaking something. So I stayed calm. I finished my meal. I let Serena believe she had won the room. I let Derek believe his silence was still harmless. Then I took Oliver upstairs and read him 2 books about trucks. Because that winter, trucks were the most important thing in his world. He fell asleep with his small hand curled around my finger. I sat there in the dark for a long time, in the room that had once been Derek's room, looking at the window that faced the old oak tree outside. I remembered my son at 11, asleep under that same ceiling. I remembered Carol in the doorway, whispering that we had built a good life. She was right. We had. What she could not have known was that a good life can still be invaded slowly by people who only know how to take. The next morning, after Derek and Serena drove away, I called Frank. I did not explain much. I did not need to. It is time, I said. There was a pause. And then Frank answered, I have been ready. Here is what most people do not understand about quiet revenge. It is not dramatic. There is no single satisfying moment where everything flips and justice appears in one bright flash. Quiet revenge is engineering. It is identifying every load-bearing element, every connection point, every place where your name has been attached without your clear consent. And then, methodically, legally, and without anger, removing yourself from the structure. When the right people are standing on something they have never had to hold up themselves, they do not know it is gone until the floor moves. Over the next 6 weeks, Frank and I worked carefully. We reviewed every account Derek had access to. The brokerage accounts, the joint credit lines, the recurring transfers, the beneficiary paperwork on instruments I had slowly allowed to become less about my wishes and more about their expectations. The estate documents that had been shaped through years of small conversations to assume a future I no longer wanted to give them. Nothing was done in anger. That mattered more than people realize. This was not retaliation in the messy sense. No threats, no dramatic scenes, no cruelty, just documentation, legal precision, and a man taking back the parts of his life he had been slowly pressured into surrendering. But the money was only one part of the plan. Oliver was the part that kept me awake at night. Frank brought in Patricia Hendress, a family law attorney who had spent 20 years proving that love is sometimes more visible in paperwork than in words. She was direct, patient, and exactly what I needed because she did not traffic in feelings. She dealt in facts. She asked for dates, for visits, for message, for canceled plans and managed access, for every time I had been invited into their life when a check was needed and then eased back to the edge once it cleared. She asked about a birthday visit Serena had blocked, even after it had already been confirmed. Then she asked whether Oliver had seen me leave that day. He had stood at the window and cried while my car pulled away. Patricia wrote that down without changing her expression. But I saw her pen pause for just a half second. From that day, I documented everything. Not with emotion, not dramatically, carefully, systematically, like an engineer cataloging damage in a structure after years of hidden stress. Because if Serena wanted to turn a family into a managed system, I would answer her in the only language she had taught me. Records, timelines, witnesses, law. For 6 weeks, I behaved exactly the way they expected me to behave. That was the hardest part. I answered Derek's calls when he made them, even though they had become brief. Dutiful things that sounded more like check-ins with a vendor than conversations with a father. I did not mention the accounts. I did not question the transfers. I did not let Serena hear any change in my voice that might suggest the ground beneath her was being measured and marked. I even kept the money flowing. Not because I owed it. Not because they deserved another dollar. I did it because routine makes people careless. And Serena had grown very comfortable inside the routine she had engineered around me. For Oliver's birthday, I mailed him a wooden train set. Serena had made it clear that surprise visits were not welcome. So I sent love in a box and received 3 lines of acknowledgement from Derek. Nothing from Oliver. He was 4. He did not yet understand what was being done around him. While Serena and Derek believed nothing had changed, I was preparing the one place they had never known existed. Carol and I had bought the cabin outside Brevard in 2009, 2 acres against the edge of Pisgah National Forest, with a creek below the property and trees tall enough to make every human problem feel appropriately small. We used to go there on weekends when the world grew too loud. Carol said the mountains made her feel correctly sized. After she died, I stopped going. The cabin held too much of her. Her coffee mug was still in the cupboard. The quilt she liked was still folded over the back of the couch. Even the silence had her shape. For years, I paid a local company to maintain the utilities and keep the place from falling apart. But I could not make myself stay there. Now I needed it. I had the water heater replaced. I arranged a deep clean. I stocked the pantry, stacked firewood, and brought boxes of old drafting tools, Carol's photographs, and every drawing Oliver had ever made for me. On my first trip back, I carried Carol's lavender bowl into the kitchen and set it on the windowsill. For the first time since her funeral, it looked like it belonged somewhere other than grief. On a Wednesday morning in early February, Frank and I executed everything. Derek's name came off the brokerage accounts. His access to the financial instruments I had foolishly opened to him was removed. The recurring transfers stopped. The joint credit line was closed. Every door Serena had learned to reach through was shut, locked, and documented by someone who got paid to make sure things stayed shut. Then we revised the estate documents. Oliver remained protected. He was named as the primary trust beneficiary, with Frank and Patricia as co-trustees. That meant if anything happened to me, not $1 would pass directly through Derek or Serena's hands. They could not manage it, pressure it, borrow against it, or dress it up as a family necessity. For the first time in years, my wishes were written clearly again, in plain language, with legal teeth. That afternoon, I packed 2 bags, loaded Carol's photographs in Oliver's drawings, and drove west toward Brevard. No note, no warning, no apology. Just a man finally leaving the trap he had spent years paying to stand inside. Derek called the next morning. I watched my phone ring from the cabin kitchen. With the mountains still blue in the morning light and Carol's lavender bowl sitting quietly on the sill, I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, confused, and careful. He said there seemed to be some kind of issue with the brokerage account. Could I call him back? I did not. By afternoon, Serena called. Her voicemail was longer and smoother on the surface, but sharper underneath. She used words like oversight and misunderstanding and said she was sure it was just a mistake. But her voice gave her away. A woman who uses the word mistake when she knows there was no mistake is not confused. She is managing the situation and waiting to see whether you are manageable. I was not. I saved both voicemails and sent them to Patricia. From that point forward, Patricia handled all contact. I had spent years answering every call like a father desperate to stay included. That version of me was finished. The first 3 weeks at the cabin felt less like hiding and more like surfacing. I woke before sunrise most mornings without an alarm, because the woods had their own quiet way of calling a man back to himself. I made coffee. Real coffee? Not the cup I used to forget on the counter in Greensboro while it went cold. I cooked eggs, toast, oatmeal with walnuts, which I had stopped making after Carol died because she was the only one who liked it. I hiked every morning. At first only a mile, then 2, then farther along trails where the trees arched overhead and the creek kept talking below the ridge. My body complained about the first week. My mind grew quieter with every step. In the afternoons, I worked on the cabin. I built a small bookshelf in the second bedroom because the room needed one. And because building things with my hands reminded me that I was more than what I had been reduced to. I read. I slept 8 hours. I sat on the porch with bourbon and listened to the dark settle over the mountains. I missed Oliver every single day. But for the first time in years, I was not disappearing inside someone else's manufactured needs. I was returning to myself. The news about Oliver came in the 4th week. Patricia called one afternoon, and I knew from the first syllable that this was not about money or paperwork. She had been building the record quietly for weeks, speaking to people connected to Oliver's preschool, people who observed and noted and kept careful logs. His teachers loved him. They described a bright, social child full of imagination and energy. But they had also seen things, raised voices at drop-off, mornings when Oliver arrived teary without a clear reason, small behavioral shifts that adults learn to document carefully because they understand what those shifts can mean. Then Patricia told me about the care log. Twice in 1 week, Oliver had said he wanted to go to Pop-Pop's house. I sat down when she said it, not because I was surprised that he remembered me. I knew he remembered. What moved me was seeing it written in a record kept by someone outside the family. Someone with no stake in protecting anyone's feelings. A 4-year-old boy, in the middle of all the control and the management and the careful arrangements, had still pointed toward me. Patricia filed the motion for temporary visitation the next morning. Serena's response came exactly the way I expected it to. Through her attorney, she tried to frame my disappearance as instability. She said I had vanished out of spite and was using Oliver to punish them. She described me as emotional, unpredictable, a man too hurt and too erratic to be trusted around a child. Patricia walked into court with records. She laid out the pattern, the financial history, the restricted visits, the canceled access, the way I had been slowly moved to the margins of my grandson's life while still being expected to fund the life they wanted to build around him. She presented a timeline showing that every action I had taken was legal, deliberate, and executed before any court proceedings began. Then she presented the preschool care log. The courtroom went quiet in a particular way when the log was read. Because adults can argue motivations, lawyers can reframe actions until they become unrecognizable. Money can be questioned and spun in 20 different directions. But a 4-year-old asking for his grandfather does not understand legal strategy. He only understands who shows up and who does not. Within 10 days, the judge granted temporary visitation. I drove to Charlotte on a Thursday morning in March with both hands on the steering wheel and the windows cracked, letting the cold air in. The exchange was held at a family services office. I arrived first. I sat in a soft chair near a basket of toys and focused on keeping my breathing steady. Then the door opened. Serena came in first. Her face was controlled so completely it looked almost painful. Derek stood a step behind her, looking older somehow, smaller, like a man who had recently understood the weight of some of his choices. Then Oliver came around his mother's leg. He looked at me for 2 full seconds. Then he ran. He hit me so hard I nearly came out of the chair. His arms locked around my neck. His face pressed into my shoulder. And every careful piece of composure I had built over those months cracked open at once. I held my grandson and cried in front of everyone in that room. I did not care who saw. The full hearing came in April. Patricia and Frank had done their work. The financial record was clean and clear. Every dollar I had given was mine to give and mine to stop giving. Every account I changed belonged to me. Every document had been revised legally, deliberately. And prior to any court action, Serena's attorney tried to reframe it anyway. He argued that I had used Oliver as leverage, that I had disrupted a stable family out of wounded pride, that my disappearance proved I was emotionally unreliable. Patricia did not raise her voice. She presented the pattern, the money, the restricted visits, the blocked access, the way I had been useful on payment days and inconvenient on every other day. She presented the dates, the messages, the canceled plans, the financial timeline, and the record of what had been denied while I kept writing checks. Then she presented the teacher's log. Oliver asking for Pop's house. Twice in 1 week. Judge Morales granted regular visitation. Every other weekend. And 1 extended visit during the summer. The words sounded almost administrative when she read them. But to me they sounded like a window opened in a room that had been sealed too long. Serena sat very still. Derek looked down at his hands. Then the judge looked at both of them and said something I have thought about since. She said that whatever financial dispute existed between the adults had no right to interfere with a child's relationship with a loving grandparent. She said that money, resentment, pride, and control did not outweigh a child's need for consistency and safety and genuine love. Then she said the court would be watching. I did not celebrate. This was not victory the way people picture victory. It was quieter. It was cleaner. It was a door opening for Oliver. A promise that whatever Serena had tried to erase with calendar excuses could not be erased anymore. After the hearing, I found Derek near the elevator. Serena was somewhere behind us, speaking in a low, sharp voice to her attorney. Derek was not moving toward her. He stood with his hands at his sides, looking like a man who had just walked out of a room where something important had been said and was still working out what it meant. I could have kept walking. Part of me wanted to, but then he looked at me, and for one moment I did not see the man who had said this is my family across a dinner table while I sat outside it. I saw the boy who used to wait by my truck after hard days at school, needing someone to notice without him having to say it out loud. I did not know it had gotten that far. He said. The words were not enough. We both understood that. But they were the first honest words he had given me in a long time. I said, I know. He started to say Serena's name, then stopped. Maybe because naming her was still the easier answer. And he was beginning to understand what easier answers had cost us. Come see me in Brevard, I said. Bring Oliver. There is room. Then the elevator opened, and I stepped inside. 3 weeks later, a car I did not recognize turned slowly into the cabin driveway. I was on the porch with my coffee. I did not let myself hope too quickly. I sat still and watched the dust rise behind the tires. Then the passenger door opened, and Oliver came out at a full run. I barely had time to set the cup down. He came up the porch steps like the whole mountain belonged to him, threw himself into my arms, and grabbed my face with both hands. Pop, he said, with complete seriousness. Is this your mountain house? I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. Yes, I said. It is. He looked around at the trees, the woodpile, the creek sound rising from below the property, and decided immediately that he liked it. Then he announced he needed to find rocks and jumped back down the steps. Derek got out more slowly. He stood beside the car for a moment, looking at the cabin, then at me, like a man measuring the distance between where he was and where he had been. Then he said Serena was gone. That afternoon we walked down to the creek, the three of us. Oliver led with the confidence of an explorer who has never doubted the map. He held my hand with one fist and Derek's with the other, and narrated everything he found with absolute authority. A smooth rock, a bent leaf, a spider web stretched between two branches, a stick shaped exactly like a sword. Derek walked beside me without many words. There were too many things still unresolved between us. Too many Sundays I had driven home alone. Too many moments when he had chosen not to look at me. We were not repaired. But he was there. That had to count as something. He told me the house in Myers Park would be sold. He said Patricia was helping with custody arrangements. He said Serena had either left or been left, depending on who told the story. Then he went quiet again. And I let the quiet be. Some wounds cannot be closed with a single honest sentence. Some bridges have to be rebuilt slowly, board by board, in between conversations that are still learning how to carry weight again. That evening, after Oliver fell asleep on the cabin couch with his sweatshirt pockets full of rocks on the floor beside him, Derek and I sat in the kitchen. For a while, neither of us said much. Then he looked across the room at the kitchen window, and he saw Carol's lavender bowl sitting on the sill. The last light of the day was touching the glass, and for a moment the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Is that Mom's? He asked. It was, I said. He stared at it for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than I had heard it in years. I miss her. I looked at my son across that table, not fully repaired, not forgiven in some easy, clean way, but present. And sometimes presence is where the long work of healing begins. Me too, I said. Outside, the mountains were going dark slowly. Inside, I poured us both more coffee. There was no hurry anymore. For a long time, I thought justice would feel louder than this. I thought if the day ever came when Serena lost her grip, when Derek finally understood what had happened, when Oliver was allowed to run back into my arms without anyone managing the moment, I would feel something triumphant. I thought it would taste like winning. It did not taste like winning. It tasted like sitting in a quiet kitchen with my son while my grandson slept in the next room. It tasted like coffee cooling between two men who had hurt each other and still, somehow, chosen not to leave. It tasted like Carol's lavender bowl catching the last light of the day, reminding me that love, if it is built correctly, can outlast the people who try to damage it. I did not destroy Derek's life. I did not ruin Serena. I did not shout, threaten, or beg for a seat at a table I had helped pay for. I simply removed myself from a structure that had forgotten I was the one holding weight. And when I stepped away, everything they had built on top of me began to shift. But the point was never the shifting. The point was what survived after it. Oliver's laugh by the creek. Derek sitting across from me again. A family not restored perfectly. But honestly, a grandfather who finally got to keep his promises. I am Walter Graves. I spent my life building things. And even now, after everything, I am still building. What Serena never understood was that I had spent 64 years learning how structures fail. Not from neglect alone, but from quiet, sustained misuse. A bridge does not collapse because of one storm. A house does not crack from a single bad winter. It fails slowly, from accumulated pressure on the points that were never designed to carry what was placed on them. They thought I was just an old man with money, grief, and too much love for his grandson. They thought they could take the money, control the visits, silence the father, and still keep the foundation standing. They were wrong. I did not destroy anything. I simply stopped holding up what they had refused to respect. And when I stepped away, the truth finally had room to breathe. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what you would have done. Would you have stayed silent and gathered proof the way Walter did? Or would you have confronted them the moment you saw the numbers? And if you believe that love, patience, and quiet strength will always outlast greed, subscribe for more stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that finally brings peace.